everybody, Dean Sweetman here along with Frank Barry. Hey Frank, how you doing, mate?
Hey, made it back today. I can actually speak audibly on the show instead of just sitting here.
Yeah, you left me with John Holtkamp last week, which was kind of epic. So anyway, we got through it.
It was a good show. If you haven't seen it, it's a full show on church apps. You should go check it out. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, there's no one better than John on that stuff. So we have a fantastic guest today, and it's actually, I'm pretty excited about it because it's really right up our alley when it comes to talking about finance and generosity in church.
Right.
It's all about telling great stories.
Yeah,
and
storytelling all day.
And we always kind of talk about that as one of the key pillars about talking about generosity in church. So we've got an author, his name is Phil Bowdle, and he's written a book called Rethink Communication, and we got him on the show today. Phil, how you doing?
Hey, how you guys doing? Good to be here with you.
Awesome, man. Yeah, we're fantastic. So,
doing great.
Had a quick look at your book. Haven't read it fully, but I love what I see. And I mean, it's such a powerful medium to be. And so many pastors don't know how to do this. Give us a little kind of overview of this whole kind of topic and how you got into it, and a little background for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So I serve as a creative arts pastor at Westridge Church in Northwest Atlanta. But I grew up as a pastor's kid. I've literally grown up in the church. So through my journey, I get to talk to a lot of pastors, a lot of ministry leaders. Yep. Just through some of the coaching and consulting I do, I get to just talk to a wide array of ministry leaders. And what I was just finding, every conversation I was having, it seems like everybody I'm talking to is saying, man, the church looks different now than it used to, and I can't really figure out what to do. Or there's people saying, wow, all these opportunities now to communicate digitally, and I didn't learn that in seminary. I don't know how to leverage this. And so I just wanted to provide try to write a book around helping people understand what the new reality is of what communication looks like today, and actually how you can leverage some of the greatest opportunities we've ever had in communicating the gospel, because we don't have a message problem, we have a message delivery problem. Yeah. So what I try to do is give a really practical playbook that any church can use for how they can communicate the great messages that they have as part of their church, and cover a number of things along the way at the end, of just anything from social media to storytelling to all that stuff, just to try to be practical and help the overwhelmed church leader, because I don't talk to many church leaders that say, well, I have so much time on my hands, I just would love to spend 40 hours just researching stuff. No, they want something that's practical they can use right away. So that's what I try to deliver on.
Is this your first book?
This is my first. I've been a part of some other publications, but this is my first book that I've written all on my own. Yeah.
That's a lot of feat. Congratulations.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, a lot of what I do, I get to serve with a great team. So a lot of what I do is being a part of helping just lead a team. And this was a whole different discipline for sure. But it's been awesome just to hear stories from people all over the place on just how it's helping them. So it's a huge payoff. I'm grateful.
Just a side note on the book. I know not the whole show is not all about the book, but did you spend a lot of time focusing on the digital side of communications, or would you say you spent a good portion of time on kind of all the like digital or print or verbal, like just all the forms of communication?
Yeah, both. I think both still matter, but I think what I try to lay out at the beginning is realizing that most churches use a playbook that worked 30 years ago, that was built around the assumption that people would attend every week, that people would pay attention when you're communicating, and that they would engage with you when you're inside the walls of the church. And you guys know that playbook doesn't work anymore. So we have changed. Exactly. And so now it looks like people are knocking at the front door of your church, but they're doing that on a Facebook message. They're doing that by looking at your website. They're watching you from afar before they ever step into the doors of your church. And a lot of us aren't listening to those knocks on the door because we're just not engaged in a digital strategy. So I think it's a physical plus digital strategy. And that's what I try to lay out in the book, and really what you need to rethink to be able to communicate in that way. Because again, the playbook of announcing it on the stage, saying it in the printing it in the bulletin, it's only going to get you so far now. And so there's new rules to play by.
So kind of jumping in, you mentioned in the book you didn't really have a background in storytelling. How did you kind of get to this point where you learned about it and ultimately became an expert in?
Well, I got my start in storytelling, if you want to call it that, as creating like highlight videos, like almost any person that's done video before. It started with cutting some clips together and just and calling that a story, when in reality it was a highlight video. And early on, I had some opportunities to say, hey, we know storytelling is important, so we want to tell stories of what God's doing in our church. And I'm like, okay, I know how to cut together a video, but I don't know how to tell a story. And quite frankly, I mean, I wasn't really seeing many resources out there that were helping communicate, hey, what are the core elements of story, apart from a 300 or 400 page book around how to write a script. And when you're talking, there's a big difference between a 2-hour movie and a 3-minute story that helps move people in some way. And so for me, a lot of this was, I didn't see the resource out there. So I had to just figure out, what are these good elements of a good story? What are those pieces that I need to have in there? Because it's not good enough just for somebody a good story isn't just magic. I mean, it takes some work. It takes refining that. I mean, you can watch Jesus and see in every parable, everything that he was saying, any story he got to share, they weren't always long, but every word mattered. Everything was leading to something. And so for me, I just wanted to take some time to study as I was trying to figure out what to do, what those core elements of stories are, so that I could try to make sure that the stories that I was telling, whether I was producing or doing the video, that I could make sure I was including that and capturing that from people.
And you started in iMovie, I'm assuming, where you just your highlight reels?
I started in Pinnacle 7 or whatever that was called, Pinnacle Studio. The reality was, most of my early stories were actually prank videos that we were doing for youth ministry. But it's funny how God uses all those early things. He also used some of my music background of wanting to be in DC Talk, which there's still a chance. You never know. But early days, I'm like, all I wanted to do was be in a band. And so God's kind of used all of that stuff over the years to kind of help me leverage that in my role today.
Yeah. Very good. I mean, we see, because we're big on telling stories, as Dean was mentioning. We think it's a big part of fundraising and giving and generosity. But it seems like a lot of pastors and church leaders are a bit afraid of this topic or uncertain. Maybe they don't have the training, or they've never seen it done well, or they're just a bit uncertain about how to be great at this, so they just don't go there. So what kind of advice would you have for somebody who's like trying to get started, trying to overcome some of their uncertainty or fear around telling great stories?
Yeah, I think great question. I think some of the intimidation comes from storytelling especially in the church, I think we're looking for the wrong things, honestly. I think when we look for stories, we're waiting for that story that we could share of, the person in the small group where they were in a crisis and everybody came around their hospital bed, and they prayed and everything was perfect, and now everything's rosy and wonderful. And the reality is, not only are those stories rare, sometimes they happen, but they're rare, but they also aren't very relatable, because sometimes we look at those stories and say, okay, that's great, that happened for them, but that doesn't speak to what I'm dealing with. And so the encouragement I would give for anybody is to say, look for the ordinary stories of people that have overcome a barrier or taken a big next step that you want other people to take. And so sometimes it's not that big sensational story. Sometimes it's just telling that story of the person that gave for the first time, and they turned towards being maybe a little bit more selfish and seeing here's the story of what God's doing in their life as they turn to a generous mindset and see what God's doing through that. And that's something I can relate to, because behind every next step that somebody takes is some kind of barrier that needs to be overcome. I think in some of the most effective stories that we get to tell at Westridge are stories of somebody that, for getting involved in a small group or something like that. And it's just the story of sharing somebody that said, hey, I was too busy. My husband thought, didn't want to be around in a circle with a bunch of people that, talk about and I don't know the Bible well, so I didn't know if they were going to ask me to pray, so I didn't want to be in a group. And so when we can find that story of that person that said, hey, I was nervous about this, and I saw this barrier, but this is what helped me overcome that barrier, and here's what God's done in my story since then. All of a sudden, we've taken all those things that people relate to, and we create a that's me moment. Everybody's saying that's me. I felt the same way, or I have that same concern, and if they can do it, maybe I can too. Mm-hmm. And so it's not always that sensational story. It's the ordinary story that can do extraordinary things in our walk with Jesus. So I think that's what we need to be looking for and leveraging. And as you do that, you have eyes to look for those simple but beautiful stories instead of the things that that could be a 2-hour movie.
Mm-hmm.
So When it comes to generosity and giving, why do you think stories are so powerful?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know this, but we don't always practice it. Is that people don't remember numbers. They remember faces. They remember stories. I mean, we've all been a part of moments where somebody's saying, "Hey, this many thousand people have been impacted by this or whatever," and the reality is that we just aren't built to connect with that in the same way. It doesn't feel as personal. I mean, I remember the first time. A lot of what we get to do at Westridge is we get to share stories of even what God's doing in some of the areas that we're working in overseas. So Burkina Faso, Africa, and West Africa, in Guatemala, and in Scotland. And because we need to show stories of things that our church is playing a part in and impacting, but they don't get to see it with their own eyes. And so I remember the moment where this really clicked for me of just the power of story is we went over to Burkina Faso, West Africa, which I couldn't have found on the map before our church got involved there. But we were going to this landlocked country and just saying, hey, we need to go here and show people what their generosity is going to. And it took an investment on our part, to do that, to say this was valuable. But that it was so important to what we do. And so we got there and we knew we were going to be involved in a ministry where they were rescuing women from sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know what the story was. That's why I was there to help kind of produce it and figure it out. And we sit down with this girl that had just gotten off the streets and just got dropped off at this place. And her name was Juliet. And she just got down, and we knew that she spoke English. So we knew, oh man, this helps us. We don't have to translate this.
Yeah.
She sits down and shares her story of how she was trafficked from, she thought she was going to France from these men that were trying to help her with her musical career. And then all of a sudden she lands in this place in Burkina Faso, not knowing what to do, and just shares her whole journey. And all of a sudden, the numbers of saying, hey, this many thousand people are impacted by sex trafficking, that's not what people remembered. They remembered Juliet's story and her faith and sharing what her burden was. And so that was a part of a generosity initiative we do at the end of every year for leading up to Christmas. And I remember that moment when so many people said, hey, if me giving to our generosity initiative, if it impacts people like her, I'm in. And if it impacts people like her, that's making me want to step up and do more than what I thought. And the reality was that was one of many stories, but it gave somebody, like something to understand and get. And so it's beautiful what stories can do just to help people understand and see what God's doing.
Great.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's a crazy, amazing story that would motivate, really anybody. I love Dean's question. We did a survey probably, 6 months ago or so, and I'm going to throw it up on the screen. So for anyone watching, you'll see it. If you're listening, you should head over to tithe.ly/TV and you can watch it there, but I'll try to narrate it as well. So we asked a question as part of the survey, and about a little over 1,000 pastors or church leaders responded, and we said, how often do you share stories or talk about the impact of financial giving? And it was like a 1 to 10 scale, like 1 being I never tell stories, and a 10 being I overdo it. We tell stories for the entire church service and talk about giving. So the average answer was a 4.5. So let's call it a 5, which to me that's it's kind of middle of the road. It's not necessarily great. It's not terrible.
It should be more.
We think it should be, when you're talking about giving, there should be a story woven in there of impact, of generosity, of need, or something like that along the way. So just seeing this data, it seems like pastors, church leaders at least around the U.S. might struggle a little bit with telling stories. So what kind of stories have you seen, or what kind of stories would you suggest pastors and church leaders share related to giving and generosity?
Yeah, I think a simple way to think about that is just answer the question, because you gave, what happened? What's happening there? And I think everybody that gives or is thinking about giving, they want to. Very few people are just doing because somebody asked them to. They're doing this to be a part of something bigger than themselves, out of response to what God's doing in your church. And so I think it's just sharing the story sometimes of The ordinary stories of the student that got to go to the summer camp because somebody gave a scholarship and was generous and felt compelled to do that. And here's what happened with that student to do that. Here's what that student experienced at the camp, and their life will never be the same. It's the opportunities of celebrating wins, but I think at the same time, the area that I think I'm most burdened by is not being afraid to share the conflict and share the things that we have not yet been able to do in the church. I always have this picture in our church. We have about 2,000 seats in our worship center. It's a lot of seats, and if it's full, it feels like everybody in town's there. The reality is we have 357,000 people in a 10-mile radius of our church. And so if we aren't telling, it can feel like a full church feels like, oh man, look at this is great. But we have to keep in front of our church. We aren't done yet. God's not finished with us. And so when we give because of what God has already done. But we also share stories of saying we give because of what God has yet to do and the best is yet to come. So when we do that, when we share the burden and the needs, what we do is we can share and say, here's why here's why we still give. Here's why we want to be generous, because there are still stories to be told. There's still moments to be shared here of what a generous God has done for us and also what God's doing in our church. And so, yeah, I think it's just mixing what God's done and sharing what God could do and calling the church to respond.
Yeah, amazing. So you guys produced quite a few videos. We grabbed one. We wanted to show the audience. So I'm going to play that real quick. Again, if you're just listening, you can hop over to tithe.ly/TV and you can watch all this, but I'm going to play it for those watching. Let's see if I can pull this off.
Hey Westridge, Pastor James here. I wanted to take a moment to tell you what we're getting ready to do. This past weekend, we took a special offering up for the Generosity Experiment, and we're able to raise together between Cartersville and our East location about $4,400. And so we were able to partner with a local real estate agency here in Cartersville to supply a brand new living space for a single mom that we've identified that just needs to catch a break. Her and her kids have been through a lot the past several months, and they're trying to get back on their feet. And so what we were able to do because of your generosity was to provide all the upfront costs for this townhouse that I'm standing in here right now, along with the first 6 months rent. And we also had enough money to come alongside of her and help her cover a portion of the utility costs as well. So we're waiting here on her to get here so that we can give her the keys to this new place. And so I hope that you're inspired by what you're getting ready to see.
Here.
Hey, how are you?
Hey.
Ambria,
Hey.
how are you?
Fine.
Hey, come on in here. Good. James,
Nice to
I'm the
meet
pastor
you.
over at Westridge. It's good
Oh, okay.
It's great to
Okay.
see you, girl. Ambria, how are you? I know you know Nick already. Listen, Ambria, I want to tell you why you're here. Our church, a lot of us have heard your story, and we know that you and your kids have been through a lot the past several months, and we know that you guys really just need to catch a break. And so our church this past week, what we did is this: we took up a special offering, and we want to bless you today with it. We were able to raise enough money to get you and your kids into this townhome that we're standing in.
Terry, baby, we home, okay?
Now listen, that's not it. We got enough money to get you guys in here, and we're also gonna pay for the first 6 months rent for you guys to stay here at no cost. And beyond that, we've also got enough money for you. We've also got enough money for you to help cover some of your utility costs for those first 6 months as well. We want you to know, man, that God loves you, and we as a church love you.
Thank you, Jesus. 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 Thank you, Jesus.
Well, listen, we want to do this for you because we want you and your kids to be together, and we want you to be in a safe place, and we want you to have what you need to get back on your feet. and to take steps to seeing your family thrive again. And again, we want to do this for you because we love you. We want you to know that God loves you. And we believe he's been generous to us so that we can be generous to other people. So that's why we're doing this for you. All right?
Thank you.
You are so welcome.
I'm a single mother. We went to shelters, sleeping out in cars. We ended up there at the Parkway North. I couldn't even let my kids go outside the room. Strange people will come knock on my door. I don't have no help. I ask everybody for help.
Thank you. I don't know you, but thank you so much.
Wow, that's a pretty amazing story. Phil, do you want to just chime in on that story a little bit and tell us, I don't know, about how it came about and how it impacted the church?
Yeah, so that was about 5 years ago, and that's what we would look back and say that was our first generosity experiment story. And the reason we called it generosity experiment was we put a series in front of people talking about generosity, and the biggest barrier that we were realizing for our community at that time, that was really still in a bit of an economic downturn, was the biggest barrier people were saying is like, what difference is it going to make when I give? And what if I can't give a lot? Because we don't have an area where a ton of people can give a lot of money. It's just not the makeup of the people that we get to reach. And so what we wanted to do is break down that barrier by saying, just by trying to get more people in the game of generosity and seeing what God would do. But we tried to say, what would happen if everybody in the church gave $1 extra this week? What story could we tell the following week? And so we just said at the end of the service, everybody bring $1 bill. And so bring $1, and at the end, come back next week and we'll see what God did with it. And that's what we called an experiment, because we didn't know how much money was going to come in. We didn't even know sometimes the story that was going to develop and what was going to happen. But we knew, we're going to trust that whatever we do, that God's going to provide the right story, and we're going to be able to put Jesus on display through it. So that was the very first story that we've done. We've probably done 25 of those since, of something along those lines, where we're giving away a car, giving away a vacation, or we helped provide a dog for a young kid that needed a service dog. So all kinds of different things. But that was the first one where we could show people, here's the difference of your $1 extra made this week collectively. And it was just a beautiful picture of what spoke to a lot of people of, I know by myself I can't do much, but I know together if we all lean into generosity, look what God can do through our church. So it's not all these giant gifts. It's just that little act of generosity and seeing what God could do. So it is probably the most hectic thing that we do as a creative team. Literally, if you were in my office a couple months ago, the question was, how can we get a camel into one of our theaters for a generosity experiment? Because what we were doing was, we're working with a refugee partner in downtown Atlanta, where it's the most diverse area in the whole world, most diverse square mile in the whole world, where all these refugees from tons of different countries come in. And we found out that the hardest people to reach are the Somalis. And we found out the secret to reaching the Somalis is camel's milk. And we're like, interesting. Okay. So camel's milk. All right. So tell us more about that. And they said it's such an important aspect of their culture that when they get here, it's nothing that they can do. And we found out if you can provide that to a family there, that they say you have relationship, and they'll invite you in and you can have conversation. And so we brought one of our ministry partners up, and we're able to provide them with a subscription to camel's milk for over 6 months to help kickstart their ministry there. So brought a camel in to help be a part of that reveal. So it was just so fun. But they're the craziest moments for our team to try to figure out, how are we going to do this? And sometimes these stories don't work the way we plan them to, but it's fun to see what God does each and every week when we're able to put these together.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, in your book, you talk about, I think, 4 ways or 4 questions every story must answer. So the first one is, what's the conflict? So I'm just curious, talk to us a little bit about that question and why conflict's so important.
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit before. Is people they want to be problem solvers. They want to make a difference, and sometimes I think we shy away and try to make everything so rosy and perfect that we miss out on the opportunities to say, hey, here's an opportunity that we want to put in front of our church to say we can't yet do this, and here's what it would take to be able to make that make a difference in that ministry initiative or whatever it is. And so I think if people can't understand what the conflict is, it's really hard for them to engage and know what part they can play. And it's also just at the foundation of good storytelling. Like there's no good movie or good story that we are going to enter into if it feels like you don't understand what the conflict is that is being overcome. So I just think that's the core essential of understanding what's that thing that can't yet be accomplished in a story, or what's that barrier that person's trying to overcome. So yeah, I think that's the critical piece of storytelling there, conflict.
So the next one, you say, what is the solution? Is it Jesus? Is it the Bible? Or is the solution something different that you're going to talk about?
Yeah, I think every story has a different solution. For somebody getting into a small group, that might just be taking the bold step to say, I'm going to try this for 4 weeks. That was their solution. And the story that came of that was them getting growing in their faith, or rescuing their marriage, or whatever it is. So sometimes it's just, this was the solution, of taking that step, or giving for the first time, or stepping up in generosity, and going from, where they thought they were capped out to a next level to see, what God was going to do for themselves or their family and stuff. So yeah, it depends on the story, but it's critical to have some kind of solution that was the answer to that conflict, or the resolution to that conflict.
Mm-hmm. And then there's kind of this third part, sounds like. So there's the stories, or there's the conflict and the resolution, or the answer, but then there's these barriers you talk about, that play a pretty important role in storytelling. So what are the barriers? What are some of the common barriers that people use?
Yeah, I think, again, it just depends on what story you're telling, but I think that's every barrier that you can speak to is a moment for a that's me moment when you share the story. And so if you can share barriers that other people can relate to and resonate with, that's where you have a chance for the story not to just be a powerful story, but something that resonates and connects with people on that. So if it took bold faith, the barrier was, what am I going to do with this obstacle in front of me, or whatever that is, or if it's if it's serving, it might be purpose. Like, is it worth my time? Is it going to fulfill the burden or call that I have in my life? So whatever the story is, whatever the solution was, there's always a gap of what the barriers and steps were that had to be overcome for that person, for them to get that solution. But it's also a chance to be real for people, because authentic stories are so vital. Not everything is perfect. Right. So sharing stories that say, hey, this is still messy. We don't have this figured out. Like, I hate it when you see a marriage story where somebody's 30 years, I'm 33, but like you see somebody young, married, they're like, oh man, we had this rough time, and then now everything's just great. It's like, shut up. You're like, let's get real. And so I think we relate to stories. Like, think about it, if you hear a message and you hear the pastor share, hey, I'm still struggling with this area of pride, and I struggle with this, and here's what I'm doing with it. I'm not done yet, though. Like, what that does to all of us is we lean in and we say, okay, if he can do that, then I realize I can accept and understand, okay, that's me too. Mm-hmm. So barriers are just the key to connection and authenticity and storytelling.
I love the part when you say that's like the connection for like, that's me. Like, I think that's a super powerful component. Like, when people can go, oh yeah, that's me. They can see themselves in it, or they can like, oh, I felt that feeling or gone through that or whatever. So super cool way to help people understand that portion.
Yeah.
So, mate, finally, you talk about the call to action.
Yeah.
What kind of a call to action does the story have to kind of involve? We understand it from the business marketing. We have a call to action as a company, and people that come to our website, we want them to do X, Y, and Z. But as far as storytelling goes, what are the calls to action?
Yeah. So if you're telling a story at an offering setup, is that call to action that you can celebrate what God's doing? Is that a call to action to say, here's why we give, and here's why I want you to lean in today? Is that, if you're telling a story of, again, of getting, taking the next step and getting baptized, do you tell that story of the person that got baptized and share the call to action at the end, to not just say, hey, if you want to take the next step that person just took, here's how you can do that. It really just, storytelling isn't is powerful in itself, but storytelling that calls people to response, it can change the church. It can change. So that's where I think we as storytellers, it's critical for us to help remove barriers from people taking their next step and help give a clear call to action on that. So for that generosity story that you saw, the call to action was, whatever you give, whatever God puts in your heart, know that it's helping make a difference in somebody's life, just like Ambria's story and just like somebody else. And you may not see every person that you're impacted, but know it's impacting people like this. So we wanted people to remove the barrier of thinking, oh, I don't have enough to give. And we wanted to help remove the barrier of people never giving before and just give them a clear, easy on-ramp for them to get engaged and see what God could do.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we definitely want people to check out the book, because I think we're just unpacking a little bit of what people can take out of it. I was sort of one final question, though, that just as I'm hearing all this and we even watched the video, like that's pretty high production value stuff. So like on a weekly basis, if I'm a pastor or church leader listening to this, what do I do? Like, do I tell a big story in every single offering moment, or do I try to do that once a month, or what do you see working, or what do you guys do at your church around kind of the consistency?
Yeah, so it's really a mix of, sometimes I could probably put it in 4 categories. I may be missing one, but a story of what God's already done. And sometimes that's just somebody getting up and sharing, for a few brief moments of just sharing a story of, because you gave, this person was impacted, or I was impacted, or here's what I saw. So it's just a brief speaking moment. Other moments, it's a photo. Like, it's a photo that everybody loves seeing behind the scenes and seeing something they haven't had that perspective on. So if you can share a story of somebody, of a moment that happened, if that same story could have been told in a different way with a picture of her at the front of that home, say, here's something that you didn't get to see, but I want to tell you the story of Ambria. It less production value, but still very compelling, powerful story. The other is video, of finding a way to do video, and there are the scale of production doesn't matter as much as the story. If story it trumps production value anytime. So if you have the good elements of story, you can make a lot of work with some simple setups. Even Pinnacle Studio, like I mentioned earlier, if they still make that, or iMovie. So you can do that. And then the other is live moments. We've done a moment before where we shared a video story before of a family that had been trying for months to raise money for their van, because their special needs daughter it was getting too big for the vehicle they had, and it was breaking down. And so we found out about this fundraiser that they were doing, and bought them like a brand new decked out Toyota Sienna, all set for them. Wow. And so we shared their story of need, of just saying, hey, here's what God's doing in our life, because we have a huge ministry for special needs at our church. And so we got to share just, here's what life looks like for them. And then we brought them up to stage, and we just said, hey, we just want to take a moment to pray for you on this. And we brought them up, and then we opened the blinds to our worship center, and outside was the brand new van. And so our whole church got to be a part of that moment reveal. It's every week it's parked right by our worship center, and the license tag is Miracle. And I could cry real easy just thinking about their story. So I'll send you all the link if you wanted to put that in the show notes or something like that, because it's just a beautiful picture of that. But that was a live moment that just took a little bit of orchestration on how we could create the Oprah moment, the reveal, but it was very achievable for any church of 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. It doesn't matter. It just took some planning and intentionality, but the resolution of that, the reality of that is our whole church got a glimpse of what our generous God looks like, and got a glimpse of seeing, here's what a generous church could look like too, and what the difference that could be. So I just think whatever your moment is, it doesn't have to be high budget to make it happen, but focus on the story that you can tell wherever the resources that God's given you. Maximize that, use it to the best you can.
Fantastic.
Yeah, totally good. So where should people go to check out the book?
Yeah, you just go to rethinkcommunicationbook.com, and there's links there for Amazon, Kindle, iBooks, all the above.
Amazing.
If you need bulk order for your team, you can get a discount there for that as well. So you got all the links there, or you can just search my name or Rethink Communication on Amazon, which is where I get all my books. So you can check it out there.
Yeah, awesome. So good. We'll make sure it's in the show notes.
Yeah, man, what a great show. I mean, it's so helpful. And like I said up the front, it's a key component in getting the message of generosity across. And I mean, you covered it so well. So if you're listening or watching, get the book. Learn how to tell great stories. It's really impactful. Thanks, Phil. Appreciate you here today.
Hey, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Great to have you, Phil.
Awesome, man. Any finals, Frank?
Man, I think we're good. It's a great show.
Yeah.
Great to talk about storytelling and communication. And hopefully the book is a great asset to a ton of churches, hundreds, thousands of churches out there that are picking it up.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure who's on next week, but
it's going to be epic.
It's going to be epic. As always, we will learn next week who's going to be on.
100%. All right. Thanks, everybody. God bless, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. See ya.